So I just want to say welcome to all of you. And it is such an honor to have you all here. And it's a particular honor to have you here for this conversation because the conversation we're going to have today is a conversation I was actually sharing with Kristen and Hannah and Jamie, who are behind the scenes. I was just sharing with them, this material is material that I have been teaching now for probably more than 15 years. And um, it's amazing to me how in the last few months, all of a sudden people have questions and people really want to hear this. For a lot of years when I taught this, people just didn't even have the awareness of what the solar plexus mutation was about and what it meant. So I feel really excited that we are entering into a time when people are really open and available to receptive to some of the things we're going to talk about today. I want to start today and say that my intention is to assure you that there is hope for the future, and that in fact, the seeds of what we build in the future are already sown within you. They're already in your heart. And as we go through some of the material today, I'm hopeful that it's going to give you some thoughts and some ideas about what skills perhaps you need to strengthen, what skill sets do you need to build to bring you into your ability to be part of crafting the future of the world, because I believe that the future of the world is full of infinite possibilities, and we can create it however we choose. So I'm glad, Kathy, that you are excited for the future. So, all right. If you don't know me, which is possible, probable, my name is Karen Curry Parker. I am a multiple best-selling author. I am the co-founder of Grace Point Publishing. I have been an EFT practitioner since 2000. I have been a life coach, one of the very first life coaches trained in the world. I was trained with Thomas Leonard in 1998. I am one of Ra Uruhu's original students. I would say I'm not an original student, but I did study with him live for several years. I'm probably more the second wave of original students. I've been teaching human design since 1999. I'm a Quantum University PhD student, probably for the rest of my life, as well as a guest lecturer. I am a TEDx presenter. If you go to TED.com, you can find my talk about burnout. And I am the host of an award-nominated podcast called Quantum Revolution. We are actually shortlisted on the Publishers Podcast Awards this year for the second year in a row. I love that the podcast piece is on here because I actually had the privilege 2 weeks ago of doing a podcast interview. It's not out yet, but it will be in I think next month, with Greg Braden. And if any of you know Greg Braden, you know he is a scientist and an engineer who has done a lot of research and writing on what's up on planet Earth, which was the question that I actually asked him. And he kind of talked nonstop for an hour and was just brilliant and eloquent. And what I loved about my interview with Greg Braden is that so much of what he said is parallel or similar or exactly the same as what we're going to talk about today. So when we talk about what's up on planet Earth, this is what human design and the chart and the prophecy, if you will, of the 2027 solar plexus mutation says. But I'm not the only one saying it. There are lots and lots of people out there. In fact, a lot of people who I've interviewed on the Quantum Revolution podcast, including Analo Smitsman, who was I think our January interview, and Kyle Cease, who was our February interview. They both talked a lot about we're on the cusp of a creative revolution. And it's up to us to engineer this revolution. And certainly I would say the solar plexus mutation talks about us being in charge of how we steer and move the evolution of the planet. So let's talk a little bit about the solar plexus mutation, because not everybody knows what it is. And in fact, I posted a couple of slide carousels on Instagram this week, and it was interesting to know that a lot of people had never heard of it before. So the solar plexus mutation is actually a prediction, if you will, or a prophecy that was contained within the original material that was revealed to the founder of traditional human design, Ra Uru Hu. In this prophecy, he was told that the chart evolves. It's already gone through a couple of evolutions, which we'll talk about. And as it evolves, the world changes. And that in 2027, there would be another evolution or another change in the chart. The chart itself, the structure of the chart would change. And that this 2027 change in the chart would herald, in Ra's perspective, a pretty cataclysmic ending of the world as we know it. And so, if any of you have ever listened to any of Ra's recording about the solar plexus mutation, it's pretty grim and pretty dark. And I will say that in my own journey with human design, I am a manifesting generator by design. I have a very loud sacral. I don't my sacral is my authority. I don't have emotional definition. I am spleen to the sacral to the throat, and that's my authority. And in my own personal journey with human design, there have been a couple of places along the journey that I've had with human design where my sacral has really just recoiled in horror. Um, the first place where my sacral really just went was when I learned about what I'll call the doctrine of no choice. That when Ra used to teach, we have no choice. We have no choice. We learn to live our type and strategy. And once you learn to live your type and strategy, you really don't have any choice over what shows up in your life. My sacral never responded to that as a teaching. And so I'm just letting you know straight up front, I do not believe in no choice. I don't think science supports the idea that we don't have a choice. The second thing that my sacral always really responded very strongly to is the solar plexus mutation information, the way it's presented by Ra. I have never in my entire life, and I'll say this and so I'm just giving you my point of view so that you know where I stand on this whole slice of information. I've never in my entire life, even way before I encountered human design, ever have I thought that the world was coming to an end. I was taught at a very young age when I was 4 by what I call my spirit guide, Thomas, that I'm here to teach love and I'm here to share love. And the future of the world that I have always seen since I was 4 is a future that is loving and filled with possibility. I will fight for that vision for the rest of my life on this planet. And my intention here is not to tell you this is true or this isn't true, because human design isn't about that. Human design is about you discovering for yourself through your own connection to your own inner authority what is true for you. And so as I share today, please don't buy into what I'm saying as absolute truth, or please don't buy into what anybody is saying as absolute truth. You are designed to connect to your own inner authority about what feels right and good and true for you. So if what I share today feels true for you, high five. If what I share today, you're like, nope, that's not true for you, also high five, because you get to decide. You get to choose what's true and right for you. And certainly that's probably, I would say that's my biggest vision for today is, yes, I'd love for you to walk away with hope, but most importantly, I'd love for you to walk away with you remembering your own inner connection to what is true for you, because that is the point of human design. You are designed to know your own truth. But let's talk about the solar plexus mutation through a different lens, maybe than the lens you've heard it from. And for us to really understand the solar plexus mutation, we have to first start with a little bit of a history lesson. Now, some of you may have heard some of this in some other programs or classes that I've taught. My intention here today is to weave for you a big overarching perspective and also to leave you with some thoughts about, well, what can you do in the face of all of this information? So for us to understand the solar plexus mutation, we actually have to go all the way back to the scientific revolution, which ended actually with the life of Sir Isaac Newton and Newtonian physics. He was kind of the last hurrah of the scientific revolution. In the scientific revolution, we sought to codify. We wanted to explore and explain the world. Most importantly, we wanted to explore and explain the world because we were starting to outgrow old institutions that were very abusive, and power mongering. Those institutions, including the church and the monarchy in the Western world, were causing people to be forced to buy into suspicions and doubts and superstitions. And scientists at that time wanted to really figure out the material world so that people wouldn't be victims of thoughts and ideas and beliefs that weren't serving them. So we saw in the scientific revolution the attempt to explain the world in a way that made sense, that wasn't ruled by capricious belief systems and power structures. Obviously, that's strictly in the Western world, and not strictly in the Western world, but it certainly is a Western thought, and certainly in many Eastern philosophies, they'd already figured it out hundreds of years before the West. So just making sure we stay clear about that piece. In human design, what we teach is that at the end of the scientific revolution in 1781, the chart itself changed. So this is not the first time that we're going through a change in the chart. We actually know that the chart changed in 1781 according to human design. And in this change, we went from being a seven-centered being based on the seven centers from the Hindu chakra system to a nine-centered being. So the heart chakra split into the G and the will, and the solar plexus chakra split into the spleen and the emotional solar plexus. Now, this actually sets us up for the evolution in the chart that's happening in 2027, which I'll get to later in this presentation. I'll break it down for you. But I want to really point out to you that we've already gone through a major change. And guess what? There was not an apocalypse. There weren't groups of people who died and got left behind. There wasn't an exclusive new club of people who had the new chart, and all the old people who had the old chart got to go live, in the mud somewhere. We all shifted. And this shift came at the end of an evolution of consciousness that resulted in us rethinking our understanding of the world and rethinking the way in which we express in the world. I do believe that one of the most notable things to pay attention to is that in this evolution, the will center emerged, the ego. And in hand with that ego came a soul curriculum, which we haven't really completed yet as a species. But that will center, that ego gave us a curriculum that said, hey, I can decide and choose what I want to create. Now, that creation process by design is supposed to be sustainable, and it's supposed to be rooted in the energy and the idea of enoughness. So if you believe you are enough, that's self-worth and value, and you know how to be in that energy and hold that energy, that sense of enoughness allows you to live in an environment of enoughness and create from that enoughness in a sustainable way. Now, the shadow of this energy is not enoughness, low willpower or low self-worth. Lack is another word for that. And certainly I would say that when we create in the world from a sense of lack, or when we believe that we are lacking, we overcompensate and we set up really weird measurement structures, and we walk around with sort of one-off pat statements like survival of the fittest, which, by the way, emerged from Darwinism, which actually is not anything really that Darwin said. Darwin even kind of questioned a lot of his own thinking, but somebody with low self-worth picked up that phrase and ran with it and created an entire system of even economics like capitalism, and caused us to be in competition with each other because we all doubted our own value. Certainly, I would say the single biggest thing that's been up for us in terms of our soul curriculum as a species is we have been deeply charged by the divine source, evolution, the cosmos, whatever you want to call it. We've been charged with healing our sense of self-worth and continuing to build the world based on the idea that all life is inherently valuable because it exists. And that when we understand that idea, when we can live from a place of internal enoughness and manifest and see in the world external enoughness, when we live and create from that place, everything shifts. And certainly, I will say that part of what's shifting for us in the solar plexus mutation is the final healing of this idea of not enough, redefining value in the world and what is truly valuable, and building a world that is based on this idea that every single life form is valuable simply because it exists, not because it has to earn money, not because it has a certain amount of college degrees, not because of anything other than you are valuable because you exist. We're not there yet, but that's been the curriculum to a certain degree that we've been studying in the school we've been in since this mutation happened in the late 1700s. Now, at the end of the scientific revolution, we had this new understanding of the world. This was a shift in consciousness. This shift in consciousness heralded in the material era. And in the material era, we had this embracing of ideas around finite amounts and solutions. We loved fixed laws with probable, possible, and predictable results. We embraced the idea that there were formulas and systems. We became very logical, and we embraced logical as the way to know. We believed in nature and natural law, and we wanted to be certain. And certainly, again, if you look at what we've constructed since the scientific revolution, we have constructed an entire world that is rooted in material consciousness. That's shifting. And that's definitely part of what's been shifting over the last 100 years. So if we look at modern consciousness evolution, or if we look at modern biology, particularly if you look at the work of Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, who is an evolutionary biologist, if we really start to explore some of the newer ideas that we see, these are not the ideas about evolution that you learn in a textbook, by the way. The textbooks are woefully behind in terms of data and research. What modern evolutionary biologists are teaching is that evolution is actually the imperative of consciousness, and that maybe evolution is a little bit more deliberate than what we were taught in school. Evolution is a very charged topic, and I'm going to talk too much about Darwinism and modern biology. But I will say that what we understand from quantum science is that when we shift internally, when consciousness shifts, the outer world shifts. And that when we get aligned with our authentic self and we get connected to what I'll call our cosmic or our quantum self, which is part of what strategy brings us to, when we live our strategy by type, what we're really doing is learning to hear the cosmic plan unfold through us. We're tuning into our inner wisdom, our higher wisdom. When we are tuned into that, then the actions that we take, the thoughts that we think, the inspirations we have actually bring us into sync with higher levels of being organized and evolved, and the world really evolves through us and through our actions. In the late 1800s, we saw the emergence of a new science called quantum physics. This new science, which, by the way, emerged hand in hand with modern art. Modern art technically starts in the 1900s. If you study modern art, you know that one of the things that modern art does is it bends reality, right? We had Salvador Dali, we had all kinds of different artists who were creating images that were mutable and impressionistic, that allowed the person looking at the picture to derive their own interpretation of the picture, right? Art and science oftentimes are the first places where we see the beginnings of evolution. So we have modern art and we have quantum physics. Now, quantum physics brought us this whole new perception of reality, which I'm going to break down for you in just a minute. We saw hand in hand with the emergence of quantum physics, the emergence of modern art, the new thought movement, which really gained traction in the 1920s, which is really when quantum science, quantum physics started to really become more of the popular understanding of how the world works. So we had the emergence in the 1920s of the new thought movement. We had teachers such as Ernest Holmes, Edgar Cayce, Madame Blavatsky, Rudolf Steiner, Maria Montessori a little bit later on. We had these people emerging into the world teaching us that your thoughts create your reality. Even the book, Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, which isn't necessarily about new thought, but I think the title is pretty fascinating given the time in which the book itself was published. We discovered from science that we're all actually connected by virtue of a quantum field, that we can create non-locally, meaning You can energetically influence things happening in other places in the world, and you can do it instantaneously. You can literally create with quantum leaps. We embraced a new idea called fundamental creativity, that we could literally take quantum leaps over what we think is possible and create the seemingly impossible, particularly if we pointed our attention in that direction. We embraced a new metric, a new sense of value, a new definition of value. And that metric was rooted in well being and not so much in numbers. So all of a sudden, our quest became, and it's been a slow quest, our quest as a human species has been, how do we create higher states of wellness and well being in the world? And not so much numbers and money or the right body size. And of course, we learned to embrace change, uncertainty, and the idea that there's a potential. For us to really understand what's going on and where we are right now, we have to visit the question, who are you? Who are you really? Because if we can embrace the idea that we are actually aspects of consciousness being expressed in human form, and that evolution is happening through us, and that the human design chart actually lays out for us a curriculum that supports us in consciously evolving and fulfilling our potential. If we revisit the question of who are we really, we start to gain not only a new understanding of what's really up on the planet, but also a new understanding of how we ourselves can be part of influencing what happens on the planet. So, the first thing that we have to remember when we pose the question, who are you? Who are you really? Is that you are light and you are literally powered by light. In fact, your nervous system is powered by light. When you have a thought or you see something, your brain functions in response to being stimulated by creating photon storms, storms of light. Light, and Ra used to teach the neutrino stream, which is basically small fragments of stardust. Light is the energy component of the human experience. We translate light into matter every second of our existence. So, right now, in this very minute, as you're listening to me, you are literally translating light into matter. I'm going to break down for you the parts of how you do that so that you can understand why your chart is so important and why learning how to work consciously with your chart as part of this mutative process that we're in is so essential on the planet at this time right now. So, if we break down the process of conscious creativity into the components, the pieces of the equation, the first thing that we see is the first part or the first component when we create something is what we call the quantum field. I like to call it the cosmic soup. This is a field of infinite possibility, or sometimes you might call it your unmanifest reality. So, right now, at this very moment, you're sitting in a quantum field of infinite possibility. The way in which potentials travel to you, ideas, thoughts, inspirations, etc., they travel to you in the form of light or photons. So, photons and light hit your body. We actually say in human design, they activate the top of your chart through the head center, and that powers up your human experience. You translate light into your manifested reality right now. And here's how you do it. Take a minute right now. I'm going to show you just a little fun. We're going to do a fun little exercise. Take a minute right now. I'm literally going to I'll give you 30 seconds. Take 30 seconds right now, not a minute. In chat, I want you to post everything you think about when you think of the word mother. Okay? Everything you think about when you think of the word mother. I'm giving you 30 seconds. If you're quickly skimming the chat that's moving at the speed of photons, you will see that in the chat there is a lot of diversity here. We've got things from narcissist to love, terrifying to strong, teacher to ugly, goddess to gone too soon. Okay, let's go back and let's take a minute first of all and just put your hand over your heart. Take a deep breath. Make your exhale a little bit longer than your inhale. Just bring your awareness back to your heart. I know that sometimes the word mother can be triggering. I want to remind you that the word mother is literally a word. It's an archetype, right? It really basically means someone who is responsible for the birth of another being. That's not a technical definition, but mother is just a word. But it's more than that when we give meaning to it, our personal meaning to it. So when you see the word mother, here's what happens in your brain. Your brain produces a photon storm. That photon storm is going to be influenced by your conditioning, the story you tell about who you are, your life experiences, your lived experiences, your ancestral lineage, everything that comprises the narrative you tell yourself internally about who you are influences what happens next with these photons. So you get a photon storm in response to the word mother. Your conditioning, your story interfaces with these photon storms. And in response to the story that you're holding, your brain then produces neurotransmitters. Those neurotransmitters match the meanings that you gave the word mother. So you all, in response to the word mother, because there's so much variety in your responses, you all created a very different set of neurotransmitters based on your own meanings of the word mother. Those neurotransmitters stimulate emotional energy. Okay, they create literally an emotional response in the body, a physiological emotional response. That emotional response, in turn, either causes your body to be in a state of coherence, where your body and your mind all work together in unison, and you actually create from a a well-being, high frequency state, or if the meanings you hold were painful or scary or anger based, then your body produced emotions in response to that narrative, creating sometimes in us a state of non-coherence. I want you to just observe this process, not because I want you to do anything with it other than to be aware that your thoughts create chemicals from a light storm, meaning you just turned light into matter. That's how powerful you are. And in that light storm created neurotransmitters, which in turn created an emotional frequency. This is really important to understand when we're looking at the solar plexus mutation, because part of what you're going to see when we talk about what's going on in the solar plexus mutation is that your emotions are profoundly creative. And that part of what we are learning how to do is to consciously harness emotional energy as an element, as a key component of our creative process. So, as I said, photons are the medium, they're part of the creative medium. What inspired the movements of the photon in the first place? Well, your narrative, the story you tell about who you are, and your conditioning field. Some of your conditioning field you're not responsible for, you were born with it. But part of what we're doing right now is changing it. Part of our biggest role at this phase in the evolution of humanity is to decondition ourselves. Because when we gain back control over the meanings that we give archetypes, like the word mother, when we take back our control over those meanings, then we gain back control over how we use our emotional energy to create vitality, well-being, and more with our emotional frequencies. So 2027, the shift in the chart coming in 2027 tells us that everything is changing. We have learned from materialism at the end of the scientific revolution, and with the emergence of the will center and willpower, we learned that we can use our bodies, our physical effort, our systems to make things happen. We can move the mud, if you will, on the planetary level. 2027 and the solar plexus mutation is saying, hey, wait, as we evolve, our ability to create is evolving. And we are gaining more and more sovereignty over the creative process. And as we learn to create consciously, our body, our energy field is changing in response, so that the way in which we build and create in the world becomes new. The story of how we create and how we be human is changing. So this mutation is not your traditional mutation. It's not Darwinian. It's already in us. It's already acting through us. It's been working through the human story at least since the late 1800s, probably before. It's not necessarily in response to our outer reality. And ultimately, and Ra used to teach this, that it may end up separating us from the animal world, setting us apart as an actually separate aspect of life on this planet. I want to say this really carefully because you'll see when we get to the end, that doesn't mean that we don't care about animals anymore. In fact, quite the opposite. It just means that we're not operating out of instinct as much, and we're operating more from a place of conscious deliberation. So this evolution is in us. It's waiting to be activated. And as we learned from Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, it's already in what he calls the morphogenetic field. The template, the energetic structure for this change is already in place. And now the energy field and the physical form is catching up. We play a part in orchestrating this next phase in humanity. Our own consciousness is actually part of creating this new world. Here's a quotation from Abraham Hicks. Some of you may have been following Abraham Hicks for a while. I know I used to get Abraham Hicks cassettes. I don't get those anymore. It's because I don't have a cassette player anymore. My husband does, though, in the basement. Consciousness does not need physical form, but physical form needs consciousness. And consciousness enjoys physical form. Hopefully you do, because physical form is the leading edge of thought. So consciousness expands through the physical form, not the other way around. So whenever we see a shift, an evolution, it happens first in consciousness, and then it happens in us. So I'm going to break down for you what's happening in terms of the chart and how the chart is changing. And I'm going to invite you to experience for yourself whether you resonate with this interpretation of this change. And I want to just encourage you to feel it in your body and to really feel it land, because I think many of us have been conditioned towards a model of an apocalyptic, end of this decade. We see it in the media, we see it with science, we see it in movies. We like end of the world movies, right? The zombie apocalypse, there's lots of apocalyptic movies. We see it in science fiction. By the way, did you know that the word apocalypse actually means a revelation? And it's only in the last few years that the urban use of the word apocalypse really means end of the world. So actually an apocalypse isn't the end of the world, it's just a revelation, right? So maybe we're not actually moving towards an urban apocalypse, but maybe towards a cosmic revelation. So this evolution is actually happening in stages. And the first stage is slated to take place February 27, 2027, when the sun moves into the gate 55. It's interesting to note that Saturn moves into the gate 55 on March the 9th, tomorrow. And it's going to sit there for most of the year. So we're getting kind of schooled by Saturn this whole year in the process of conscious creation. So don't think, again, as I said, it's not like you're not already in it. We're already getting schooled in the process of deliberate creation. And certainly Saturn is teaching us very beautifully this year. In quantum human design, I call the gate 55 the gate of faith. And so part of what's happening is we're moving into a new global cycle. So the global cycle, the planet itself goes through global cycles. They last about 400 years. The last global cycle is in the incarnation cross of service. This new incarnation cross that we're moving into is the incarnation cross of the sleeping phoenix. In 2027, we move into a new global cycle. By the way, if you're wondering how do those get calculated, if you're into astrology, the global cycles are calculated from the precession of the equinoxes. Do not ask me what that means because I am not an astrologer. But I will say that each global cycle gives us a theme. The theme of this previous global cycle, the one that we're coming to the end of, has been all about learning how to use will. The cross of service has the will center defined through the 4037. The cross of the sleeping phoenix is all about redefining creative power. and using creative power to unify people around common convictions in a sustainable and peaceful way. So, the first thing that happens in the first phase of this evolution is the energy flow in this channel changes. So, we have, of course, featured in the solar plexus mutation, we have the solar plexus featured. The solar plexus right now, remember, it's kind of a new center. Right now, it has two ways of functioning. If you're emotionally open, you feel and sense other people's feelings. If you're emotionally defined, you have emotional waves, variability in your emotional energy. The trick, if you will, or the challenge, the curriculum that's up for us right now is to learn how to stabilize our experience of emotional energy. For those of you who have an open emotional solar plexus, that means learning how to hold true to your own inner emotional landscape, no matter what's going on around you, because it's very easy when you're emotionally open, as some of you know, to get caught up in the emotional energy around you. Your job is to learn how to hold on to your own inner emotional frequency, no matter what's going on around you. For those of you who have a defined emotional solar plexus, your job is to learn how to keep yourself in a baseline frequency. That means this: your emotional wave is going to go up and down. That's normal and that's natural, and there's nothing wrong with you if that's your emotional energy, especially if your emotions are your center is defined. But the trick for you is learning how to not tank the low end of your wave by asking questions like, what's wrong with me? Right. And to not go absolutely, compulsive when you get to the top of your wave, because all of a sudden you feel really good. But to instead know how to continuously bring yourself back to a baseline frequency of abundance. To know that if you're low on your wave, you're going to feel better. And if you're high on your wave, you're going to know how to stabilize it so that you're creating with consistency and deliberation. For both open and defined, we're learning how to hold a baseline frequency that is abundant. And abundance lives in the solar plexus, by the way, which I think is interesting. And hopefully you do too, right? Abundance lives in the solar plexus, meaning the more we can calibrate ourselves with faith, that's the gate 55, we can calibrate ourselves with faith that we are enough and we have enough and we live in enoughness. When we have faith that we have enough, then we create the vibrational frequency and energy that is aligned with that enoughness. Now that energy calibrates, go back to our vision of our mothers, right? It calibrates the heart. We know from human design that located in the heart is a magnetic resonance field called the magnetic monopole that attracts experiences and perceptions and events into your life. When you stay in a state of enoughness, when you have faith, and you know your value, and you know your lovability, you calibrate your heart, that magnetic resonance field, to draw into your life's experience things that match those beliefs. So you are consciously creating through your faith, by healing your own self-worth and healing your own sense of lovability, you are consciously creating in yourself a deliberate state of attractive energy that pulls into your experience things that match your value, your lovability, and your sense of enoughness. That's probably the thing we need to all be working on right now. Because when we are not creating from a place of sufficiency, when we think we are not enough, or we get scared because we think there isn't enough, and I'll handle at the end questions about, well, there really isn't enough in some places. That's true. It's true. And if you are in a position where you do have enough and you are enough, that's because there are people who are not living in that state yet. That's why it's so important for you to take care of this for yourself, because you become a tuning fork for the world. When we live in enough,ness, we pull into our experience things that match our sense of enoughness. That is the job of the incarnation cross of the sleeping phoenix, the theme of the sleeping phoenix. That is our jobs as human beings, knee deep in an evolutionary process where we are learning in a brand new, empowered way how to create sufficiency on the planet. So what does this shift mean in this channel? So the way the hardwiring in this channel changes, means that we begin to change the nature of how we bond and mate. We begin to change the nature of how we create and share resources with our family. We begin to be rooted in alchemy and the abundance of spirit. Our emotional energy stabilizes, meaning we become less reactive and we become more deliberate. And we see here the end of binary consciousness. We have been deeply trained as a result of materialism to think of things in the terms of this or that. I want to invite you to embrace the idea, what if it's both and? I believe personally that part of the reasons why we're seeing so much variability in what we think are really key core concepts in the human story, like masculine, feminine, male, female, that why some of these things are shifting is because our consciousness is shifting. We're getting out of the idea that it's lack or abundance, and we're getting into the idea that it's all that and more. Quantum thinking means there isn't right or wrong, this or that. There is only the evolution of closer and closer states of alignment with abundance. And I believe, honestly, ultimately love. And we see that in the G Center. So here's just a little quotation for you from John Randolph Price, who was an incredible teacher about abundance. I keep my mind and thoughts of this world off this world, and I place my entire focus on God within as the only cause of my prosperity. I acknowledge the inner presence as the only activity in my financial affairs. As the substance of all things visible, I place my faith in the principle of abundance in action within me. That's kind of a very spiritual way of looking at the energy of the Gate 55. In the stage 2 of the shift, we see that the channel 50, the flow of the energy through the channel 59-6 shifts. This channel in quantum human design is called the channel of provision. It is also sometimes called the channel of reproduction and mating. And it's one of the places in the chart where we see the energy for working for sustainability and resources. It's a place where we work to create resources for the people we love. It's also a place where we possibly go to war, and we definitely will go to war if we think we are lacking or our people are lacking. So if we look at war and the root of war in the world, we see that oftentimes war is a result of othering, and that othering is ultimately oftentimes rooted in a belief in scarcity of resources. And so as this channel shifts, the energy flow and the themes of this channel shifts, what we see is the death of desire in the negative way that we think of it. Doesn't mean you won't be wanting to create something new, but it won't be desire rooted in lack. It won't be desire rooted in emotional passion that can sometimes be destruction. We see the death of this desire specifically in relation to reproduction and war. And when I say reproduction here, I'm really talking about sex and sexuality, in particular sex and sexuality being used in a violent way or a non-consensual way. We see with the shift in this energy, actually the potential not for, I mean, obviously it's there's a potential for a scarcity of resources, but we also see, because this is thematic, and remember, everything in the chart is thematic. Everything in the chart is an archetype. We are the ones attaching meaning to it. The meanings are not absolute. Again, think of the word mother. There's no absolute with what is a mother, right? Other than the definition. But our meanings are what determine our experience of the archetype of mother. Our meanings around resources and the idea of resources and sustainability influence our experience with resources and sustainability. We see with this channel and the shift in the energy in this channel, actually the potential for us to enter into an era of sustainable. The sustainability is here. Peace. And of course, an end of learning from a place of contrast. Now that's a mind blower for a lot of us, because a lot of us have learned very well to create in the face of disaster and chaos, right? I don't want that. I want something else. If we are living in a place where we are holding an abundant frequency of energy, when we remember our baseline frequency is abundant and faith, when we hold that energy, our creative question isn't, oh, I don't like this. I don't want this. What else is possible? Our creative question becomes, ooh, what can I create next? And it's out of pure curiosity and creativity that we seek to create, not in response to tragedy or chaos or contrast. The next thing we see is a shift in this channel 3740. Now, remember, we've had this long 400-year long school about this channel because this is what's been up for us in the global cycle that we've been in. This channel is a place where we make bargains, deals, and contracts. Actually, this is also where the marriage contract lives in the chart. We call this in quantum human design the channel of administration. This is where we do community. It's where we build agreements, where we create together towards communal well-being. When this channel shifts, we really see a cementing of the change in the nature of all of our agreements. So our agreements become rooted in the awareness that you are valuable because you exist. Therefore, we're not going to make any agreements that compromise or violate anybody else's value. We see a shift in our agreements, especially our long-term bonds. We see a shift and a change in collective infrastructure that reflects these changes. The fact that we've codified gay marriage in America, albeit it may be under duress at the moment. The fact that we are codifying these pieces, these infrastructures, tells us that this whole channel is shifting. The old rules about community and what bonds us and what binds us is shifting. This energy shift brings us new frontiers in what it means to create community. We also see that business, because this circuit is part of business circuitry, business now becomes rooted in abundance and spirit. And we begin to ask ourselves in the world of business, does this feel right? We're not compromising heart and profit. Both and, remember, we can have heart and profit. And we see in conjunction with this corresponding creations of collective infrastructures. We make agreements because they're right, and not only because there's an exchange of value necessarily. This becomes a very big we versus me kind of energy. And again, this is another place where peace lives in the chart. We see the potential again for us to be making decisions that move us closer towards peace and away from scarcity and fighting over a perceived scarcity of resources. The next phase, the next thing we see shifting in the solar plexus mutation is the channel for 1949 actually comes apart. So it doesn't just, the wiring doesn't change, it literally is no longer connected. Now, this is a very interesting channel because this is a channel, first of all, that connects humans to mammals. And so Ra used to teach that we need to eat meat as a species because it grounds us, right? So the 49 connects with the 19 in the root. The animals have the 19. We have the 49 as part of our design. That connection with mammalian circuitry means that we have to eat meat to ground ourselves. When this channel comes apart, as I said in the beginning, it changes our relationship with nature. It delineates us out of this primal sort of carnivore energy. Now, as I'm saying this, please know that if you're eating meat, this doesn't mean you're like a collective Neanderthal that's not evolving. Remember, evolution takes time. And if your body is telling you right now that you still need to eat meat, please do what you need to do. It feels right for you. Remember, human design is not about this is what you need to do. Human design is about you finding your own inner authority and doing what's right for you. So if you feel like you need to eat meat, you're not an unevolved human, okay? Just do what feels right for you. And what this does say is that the way in which we're eating is changing. Our biological need to eat meat to ground ourselves is shifting. And so this is, as I said, the final delineation of humankind out of the animal kingdom. This changes, of course, also, this is where courtship lives in the chart. So it changes the entire definition of courtship and marriage and the agreements that we make around marriage. It also changes the way in which we eat, which also further changes the economy, because eating is a big part of the economy, and our energy system. So you are, eat your vegetables because you'll probably be eating more of them in the future. So let's talk about what does this really mean in terms of the world? What is the potential of all of these different shifts and changes in the chart? Well, the first potential is that food and the drive to feed people, to give people access to high quality nutrition and water, that this becomes a big part of what drives us as a species, that we become deeply involved in building communities and creating streams of distribution of resources so that people are well fed, and that we no longer fight because of lack. We work together to create sufficiency for all. That's that's my interpretation of that. So we have to go back to the question, who are you? Who are you really? As part of this evolution, you are the manifestation of consciousness. You are part of this leading edge of this shift and change. And the very first thing that has to change is we have to change our belief in what's possible. It is very hard to build towards anything if you don't have a vision of what else is possible. If you are allowing yourself to be fed visions of doom and visions of the apocalypse, if you're allowing yourself to be fed visions of limitation and lack, and you're allowing yourself to buy into the possibility that there isn't going to be enough for all of us, and you are scared or worried or afraid, or you're giving that energy, then you're part of creating or moving us forward towards that vision. We know that the meanings we give words, the meanings we give archetypes, are a part of what we create within ourselves physically. We create the energy for that. You're the space. You're the space in between your manifestations, and that space is consciousness. You're wildly dynamic. You're not fixed and rigid. You are a fluid movement of consciousness and form. So let's talk about some other things that are happening as part of this shift and part of this change. We start to see, as this change, part of this change, the end of logic as we know it. It doesn't mean we won't have logic, but logic is about being able to predict patterns so that we know what to expect in the future. We have become conditioned to think of logic as the only way of knowing and the only way of creating. And part of what's happening in this shift, especially as the solar plexus begins to take center stage away from the spleen, spleen is all about logic. Solar plexus, not so much. We see that what's happening is that we emerge through this evolution, this shift, with a different sense, a different awareness around what feels right and how to go about creating it. We start to create in response with our sensual energy, our vibrational energy, as opposed to moving the mud with the physical force. We start to understand that anything is possible. That's a pretty illogical thought, by the way, but there's actually a lot of science behind that thought. There's actually a lot of logic behind that thought. Part of what's happening here is we move more towards the solar plexus as being an awareness center, and we're not losing the spleen. It's not like your spleen's going to go away, but this role that reactivity has, this role that fear has versus deliberate creation, it starts to be minimized. We are no longer as instinctive in how we respond to the world. We don't let fear run the show as much, and we remember, or we reactivate our innate creative power to build in response to our ability to hold high frequencies of emotional states. So we have intuitive knowing that's driven by love and a drive towards creating well-being for all. We shift from lack to abundance when we move from spleen to solar plexus. We cultivate, as a result of these shifts, new conscious connections. The ways in which we engage in relationships is shifting. We are no longer engaged in relationships that are contractually obligated to a fault. We get to redefine for ourselves what is a consensual connection. And we get to choose, we get to decide, how do we want to bond and be in relationship with others? We are building as a result of these changes. Part of what's happening is the economic circuitry in the chart is shifting quite a bit. And our economic circuitry becomes rooted in love and integrity. In other words, business begins to serve the role as a result of these shifts. Business begins to serve the role of building towards doing business in a way that feels right and sustains others. So we're no longer building businesses in a competitive me way. We're building business in a way that allows us to amplify the creation and the expansion of resources for everyone. We see changes in major systems, education systems and governmental systems. And part of what we're seeing on the planet right now, and again, in my podcast, all of these different high level thinkers that I've had the pleasure of interviewing over the past few years have been saying over and over again, we reach the outer edges of a systemic growth cycle. And that at the outer edges of the system growth cycle, systems that can't expand beyond the limitations of the cycle are coming apart. And certainly, I would say that a lot of what we see happening on the planet right now is the dissolution of systems, systems that are not rooted in the idea that all life is valuable because it exists. We see the evolution of a better democracy, a democracy that is more representative of collective thinking and not rooted in mistaken understandings of what power is, and certainly not rooted in lack. We see an amplified, as a result of this mutation, an amplified creative capacity. Our creativity, we are by design, our creativity is going through the roof. And I actually think that what we'll see as a result of this shift is the beginning of maybe what I might call a new renaissance for humanity, or a new creative revolution, where the possibility of us attracting through harmonizing and resonating and holding higher frequencies of energy, attracting into our awareness the solutions necessary to the challenges facing humanity today. We see a promise of a better world. So I have a dear friend, his name is Jim Tree Gilmore. He is a carrier of sacred pipes. He is a good friend of many Hopi elders. He actually has a turtle pipe, which is a pipe that was commissioned by the United Nations. He's done sacred pipe ceremonies between Israel, the Israeli government, and Palestinians. He's done pipe ceremonies at the United Nations. He recently actually posted an update from the Hopi prophecy. I should go find it. I'll go find it and post it for you guys. But the Hopi people have a rock that has a prophecy on it. And this prophecy has a timeline on it. And part of what the Hopi prophecy says is that when the earth is ravaged and the animals are dying, a new tribe of people shall come unto the earth from many colors, classes, creeds, and who by their actions and deeds shall make the earth green again. They shall be known as the warriors of the rainbow. I really do believe that we are not standing on the edge of the end of the world. We are standing on the edge of an era. The edge of an era that has just been one small step in our evolutionary cycle. And we are moving into a new era where we get it. We get the fulfilled potential. We are able to fulfill the potential of the human story in a more effective, more equitable, more just, and more sustainable way. But we're not going to get there if we don't have a critical mass of awakened people, meaning you play a very big part in evolving this story. So your life is actually a template for what can be created, and ultimately for what you can give the rest of the world. Remember, I said you are a human tuning fork. The more you bring yourself into alignment with these evolved energies, the more you are able to lift up the frequencies of the energies of the people around you. So what are some things that you can do to usher in this new era, to continue with this activation of this mutation? Number one, get yourself back to a meditation chair on a daily basis and visualize a better world, visualize peace, visualize wellness and well-being, visualize a well-fed world, a well-educated world, a peaceful world. The more we are rooting ourselves in a vision of a new possibility, the more that power of that vision grows. You need to learn to trust yourself. This is why I think, again, the big gift that human design brings, to connect yourself with your own inner wisdom and to learn how to follow your intuition, to know what feels right for you, and to not always learn to rely on logic as the only way of knowing. Unless you have a lot of logic in your chart, then you get to do logic because that's your design. And of course, you have to know how to stay anchored to yourself, to your power, to your creativity, so that you can take a role as the creator and a leader into the future. You have to know how to hold your energy so that you can influence and regulate the rooms you live in. I want to bring you back to an important thing, an important thought here. But here's the thing I really want to leave you with. You're not a label. Your human design chart is not a label. You're not a fixed story. You're not a static state. You're not even a noun. In fact, I just found out recently that human is actually an adverb. It's an adverb. You're a human being, right? It's an adverb. You are dynamic. You are pure potential. What you are being in this moment, all of you listening right now, what you're being in this moment is a cosmic event. The moment itself is temporarily static. So it feels like, oh, this is who I am. It's static. But really, you're dynamic and you're evolving. We are each an expression of the creativity of the divine. The cathedral of your life journey is an experience of holiness. This is not a building you go to. It is right inside of you, constructed every moment of your life. We build it by letting go of our need to manipulate, control, and judge so that we may simply be the creative fulfillment of who we truly are. This is what I wish for you. So if you think about it this way, these are big, bold glass windows. All the light comes through, right? But when we are conditioned, when we have curtains in front of our windows, or our windows are scratched or cracked, you've taken a lot of blows, it impacts the way the light gets through. The most important thing that you can do right now on this planet is to do whatever you need to do to decondition yourself so that you can allow more light to get through, so that you can be the light, and so that you can regulate how you use those lights, those photons that are creating inside of you right now. The more you move this conditioning out of the way, the more you move aside and heal any of those places where you've internalized the message that it's not okay for you to be who you are or how you are. The more you move that aside, the more light gets through. And the more light gets through, the more you get to be the person you were born to be. And the more you fulfill the role of being that person you were born to be, the more you do your part in ushering in this new era of sustainable peace. So please do whatever you can do, whether you want to take a course from me or training from me, read a book. I honestly don't care how you get to wherever you need to get to clear any obstructions that might be blocking the light from flowing through you, but do it. Do it now for yourself. Do it now for your children and your grandchildren. Do it for your parents and your grandparents. Do it for your ancestral lineage, and do it for the world. You are a diamond. Let the light shine through. The true beauty of the diamond is in how the light reflects through it. So you are the light, and your human design is just a diamond coming through you. So you owe it to yourself and your loved ones and to the world to make the story of who you are absolutely amazing. So I'm going to end with this. Every prophet peddles a good doomsday scenario to which they have insider knowledge and that they can sell to others to assure others the ability of survival. A profitable prophet will declare that if you just follow their instructions, you'll survive, win, and become the leader of a newborn world. What if the opposite is true? What if you embrace hope, abundance, and the possibility of a positive future for all? What if we embody the idea that the fulfillment of the potential for your life, for all of life, becomes the seed of a brighter tomorrow that promises riches for all, and that everyone becomes sovereign over their own resources and over their own destiny? We are the seeds which promise to bloom and spread the capacity for us to amplify the fulfillment of the human potential and the fulfillment of the human story. Stop preparing for the apocalypse. Instead, so I was throwing out to my team the other day, I was like, there is no opposite of an apocalypse. I want a word that's the opposite of an apocalypse. And Teresa, who runs the Understanding Human Design community, said, well, what if we call it a mirror-apocalypse? So we are moving towards the mirror-apocalypse. Remember that a miracle is just simply a disruption of an old pattern, an unexpected outcome, an unexpected good outcome of an old pattern. So let's shift the patterns. Let's build towards an equitable, just, sustainable world of peace. All right. On that note, because we are out of time, I will lovingly and gently say, Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for listening to me. Thank you all for being part of holding this vision. I love you all very much. I feel very grateful to be on this planet at this time with all of you. I thank you for being midwives of a future world. I thank you for doing your part in engineering the future of humanity. And oh, just thank you. Mwah. See you soon.